Dr. Holt,
Yes, sir.
I just want to let you know that I communicated with one of our committee members, Janet Jarvis. She'll be a little bit late today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I've announced this before, but for the sake of reminding, which I'm going to do again in just a moment, you're going to notice my eyes going back and forth as we are having the meeting, as well as you will see my name in twice. And that's merely because in order for you to see and hear me, I'm using my iPad for that purpose. But in order for me to see everything that's going on, I've got it on my desktop as well. So my eyes are going back and forth from the desktop to the iPad. Don't worry, I'm not getting lost and getting lofty in my perspective. In light of that, we're going to get rolling, and I'm going to give it to my partner, Erica, to greet and do roll call.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Executive Steering Committee meeting today, March 22nd, beginning of spring break in the city of Portland. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'd love to just quickly acknowledge all of the Executive Steering Committee members who are joining us in the virtual space today. I'm just going to call off your names. If you would unmute yourself and acknowledge your presence today, would be greatly appreciated. I believe I'll start with Ms. Kristen Sheeran from the Office of Governor Brown.
I'm here, thank you.
Awesome, thank you for being here. President Lynn Peterson.
Here, thank you.
Great. Mr. Brendan Fenn with ODOT UMO.
Good afternoon, Miss Erica. Present.
Indeed. Thanks for being here. Has Steve Witter joined us yet? Okay. All right, we'll come back to him. Mr. Nate McCoy.
Good afternoon, all present, and go Ducks.
Indeed, you know, I can jump in there, go Ducks as well, and go Beavers. That'll be the first time and maybe the only you'll hear that come from me. Dr. Ebony Amato. Okay, we can keep moving. I thought I saw her in the room. Mr. Bryson Davis, has he joined us yet? Mr. Marlon Holmes. As mentioned earlier, I understand Jana Jarvis as well as Ms. Julia Brim Edwards will be joining us shortly.
I'm actually on the line already.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Thanks for being with us today, Ms. Julia. And what about Mr. Robert Camarillo? Well, thank you to those who are in the space with us today. We appreciate your time and continued effort to help us move this work forward. Ms. Natalie, you can head to the next slide. Awesome. Today we have a very jam-packed agenda as always. The work never stops. We're going to have an opportunity, as we always do, for public comment, for project update. Then we will have an update from Mr. Brendan Fenn and Ms. Lucinda Broussard with the ODOT UMO office. Also have a brief comment from Portland Public Schools. And then we'll have an overview, a recap of the ICA, the Independent Highway Cover Assessment Team, and the work that they've done thus far. Before we move into the next phase, I'd love to also acknowledge our chair, Vice Chair Orlando Simpson. Has he joined us?
Thanks, Erica. I'm here, ready to go.
Awesome.
2.5 hours.
Indeed. The work ahead. Yes, sir. With that, Miss Natalie, you can move to the next slide. I want to just remind us in the room, you all are pros at this. Your voice matters. I don't think you all have any issues with stating what's on your mind, but we appreciate you to continue to engage, always to speak your truth, to listen to the other colleagues, listen to the presenters for understanding. Oftentimes we'll get into some heated discussion, but we want you to deal with issues and not people. Regarding that, oftentimes we'll experience a bit of discomfort, but that's how we grow, isn't it? Even in that discomfort, we're asking you to remain respectfully engaged. Those who can, please keep your cameras on. Those who do not, we understand that there are issues in self-care and other things that are happening. So we definitely understand that. And please accept and expect that we won't be able to solve everything today, but we're doing our best to be responsive to your questions, your needs, and to the community as we move this very important work forward. Next slide, please. With that, I'm going to hand things back to Dr. Holt.
Thanks, Erica. I appreciate it. Prior to our public comment moment today, there are some things that I think are important to settle again in our understanding and in our mind. A few months ago, we spent quite a bit of time developing some values for this work, and the Executive Steering Committee set forth those values through a significant process of thoughtfulness and responsiveness to the concerns of the community. The top value out of that conversation is restorative justice. And restorative justice is a value that suggests focus on the most impacted, harmed, marginalized people group who once were in the area that we're focused on. That's the Black community. And as mentioned earlier, as the strategic consultant and facilitator to the Executive Steering Committee, part of my role is not just helping us through the process, but it's also reminding us on the work that we're doing, as well as addressing and adjusting contextualized work and feedback. There are many communities and individuals who are concerned about this work, and we value your input. We value your thoughts. We value your thoughtfulness. However, this particular project is specifically to those elevating those voices of the people who've been harmed by the actions of the Oregon Department of Transportation. We really want to create space to hear from them. So we encourage, and this is me speaking as, again, the strategic consultant on this work, we encourage you to utilize all avenues to dialogue and engage and continue to let your voice be known and heard through email, through correspondence. But we'd like to hold this public space to give opportunity, again, to hear from those who have been impacted by and are being impacted by the decisions that are happening at this level. So thank you very much for your continued work and support in that regard. And as other opportunities provide, we certainly expect to hear from you. So in light of that, we're going to go to public comment if we have any that are in the room. You will have 1 minute, and at the end of that minute, or as the minute is winding down, you'll be made aware of that, and then we will move to the next individual. Are there any in the room now?
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Holt. I see three hands raised at this point. I'm going to go ahead and share my on-screen timer just to keep us all limited to that 1 minute, which I'll just emphasize is consistent across our project committees. And I will play this once we do a mic check, and then comments will be limited to 1 minute, and unfortunately comments that run longer will need to be interrupted. So with that understanding, I will go ahead and move to our first commenter, Chris Smith. I'm going to ask you to unmute and provide your comment.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to call the committee's attention to a very interesting document that came out of the covers assessment, and that is Appendix E, which is a technical analysis of the freeway design. You have to scroll all the way to the bottom of the resources page to find it, but it's a remarkably clear-eyed critique, and I would urge all of you to read it in full. That document refers to several versions of a 15% concept design for the freeway. I don't believe those documents have ever been released to the public, and I would ask this committee to make those public so that we can see the underlying data that was used in this assessment. To give you just one tidbit from that Appendix E, on page 13, there's a comment. There is an opportunity to better reflect the congestion and safety benefits from an extended shoulder along the entirety of the project corridor, which may mitigate the need for an additional auxiliary lane where proposed. So it raises some very interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to our next commenter, Joseph Courtwright. Please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
My name is Joe Courtwright. I'm with No More Freeways. I want to note that later today, you're going to get a presentation that discusses the width of the freeway. Finally discusses the width of the freeway. That has effectively been a state secret for the last 2 years. They have not told us, ODOT has not revealed that the freeway was actually 160 feet wide enough for a 10-lane freeway. I've repeatedly asked that question, as Commissioner Simpson knows, and his department staff have steadfastly refused to disclose it until now. And so now, 2 years after the end of the public comment period on this project, we're finally being given some information, and I would argue it's misleading, about the actual width of this freeway. And so as you look at this presentation today, I want you to know that the only reason that information is being presented is because we raised this issue at No More Freeways. And I would hope that we are given more than 1 minute to present factual information. You're violating your own principle of giving people the opportunity to participate. You're guaranteeing our voice doesn't matter.
Thank you for that comment. We need to move on. I will look for any other hands. I see a hand from Aaron Brown. I will ask you to unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Great. Good afternoon, ESC members. In a few minutes, you're about to hear ODOT tell you about a peer review process that they conducted in May of 2020. They are all too eager to share with you the peer review's findings, which paint a rosy picture that ODOT's proposed freeway expansion would be the first in American history to somehow actually reduce air pollution, greenhouse gases, and noise. But here's the catch. All of these claims included in this peer review document are entirely dependent on the volume of traffic and whether the proposed expansion increases or decreases the number of cars. And as far as we can tell, the panel apparently did absolutely nothing to validate the accuracy of these traffic projections. We submitted a highly technical 12-page document co-signed by numerous transportation planners that found deep flaws and systemic biases in these projections. In short, ODOT gave the peer review team bunk numbers, didn't give them the chance to question the accuracy of said bunk numbers, and thus they are about to give you bunk findings. Community opponents have caught this agency lying to you numerous times in the past few months. I echo Joe's comments that if you have even a modicum of skepticism, you as ESC members can ask ODOT to let us present these concerns to you free from the restrictions of an all too short 1-minute public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Holt, I see no more public comments. I will stop sharing and we can move on with the presentation.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate that. Chair Simpson, I'm going to give you an opportunity to say a few words as we do in this meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. I don't have a lot today, but definitely appreciate the individuals in the public testimony period. They've definitely been really consistent and persistent on ensuring that, you know, their concerns are being met and addressed and discussed in a public setting. So I know exactly what it's like. And I think a lot of people that come from similar backgrounds as me or look like me know exactly what that feels like. Because it feels like there's a sentiment of them not being respected or heard. But I will assure to them that they are being heard. And I'm going to do my best along with my other fellow commissioners on ensuring that we're holding not only Megan and the project team and Brendan accountable, but also just the agency as a whole as we go through this organizational and modernization of ODOT to become a 21st century transportation agency. So I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge that I appreciate their persistence in terms of making this place and this agency better. There was one thing I wanted to make sure that I corrected Dr. Holt on, and I like to correct people on this every single time because you were referring to restorative justice as it pertains to harms ODOT has done wrong to the historical community. But I just want to make sure that there's a point of clarification. It wasn't just ODOT. It was a federal government. It was a local government. And it was a whole institution of imperialism and supremacy that created the I-5 corridor. And so it would be easy to just say ODOT. I know ODOT is convening the conversation today, but it is not just one agency. It is a multitude of agencies that have created the injustices that exist in communities, specifically Black communities, which is why we're talking about restorative justice as such a sensitive matter. So I just wanted to make sure I got that on the record and it was very clear that this is a shift we're going through in the 21st century, as you can see in society, and we're just going through those little speed bumps and all of those emotional sentiments people are expressing in today's lay of the land. So I appreciate everybody being here, excited to keep the thing moving forward and continuously working with our community stakeholders to make sure that what we do with this project can be something that can be looked at and modeled in other places around this country, if not the world. So appreciate the time, Dr. Holt.
Excellent. Appreciate your comments. Two things also. Today's conversation, this agenda is extremely full, and so we anticipate a robust engagement, which means that we may go beyond our proposed time. I want to prepare your minds for that. I want to acknowledge that if you have to drop off, we fully understand, but want to make sure that the conversations are not rushed and that you don't feel pressured. I'm going to do my best, along with Erica, to keep us on time and to keep things moving forward. However, we aren't going to shortcut what becomes necessary within the stage and the space. The second thing I want to say is that the information you historically would have gotten earlier today, so that you would have a chance to reflect and look over the documents we did not get out to you earlier, and apologize in regard to that. And so with that information being covered, if there are any questions or comments, we will, I will pause for that, and then we will go into our next item. All right, well, let's go to our project updates. Is Jonelle in our space? I don't hear him, so I will go to, let's go to the next slide. That's the HAB. And Erica, if you could give us an update.
Indeed, searching for my unmute button. Want to definitely make you aware about what's going on with the Historic Albina Advisory Board. It has been an honor to serve with these very invested community stakeholders and leaders in the Black and Historic Albina community. We have been having some very in-depth and robust discussions around the independent highway cover assessment work. They have been doing an excellent job, the ICA team, with providing context, helping that group to contextualize what is possible in order to inform the recommendation that will be coming to the Executive Steering Committee. In our last meeting, we did approve the charter and have identified some members from the advisory board that will serve on the joint subcommittee with some of you from the Executive Steering Committee. So be looking for those invitations from the independent cover assessment team in regards to those upcoming meetings. The group has also been working alongside Miss Jessica in regards to the project and how we are planning to rebrand this particular I-5 Rose Quarter project to reflect the values that you all so diligently worked on. So it's been exciting. The design team has also been working with the group to help give a baseline for the particulars of the project in order to help us make a more informed decisions and recommendations for the community. So please be looking forward to some more dialogue between the groups as we work collaboratively to continue to push the work forward.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I I don't see Jonelle yet. So are there any questions at this moment of the Executive Steering Committee for Erica related to the HAB? Doesn't look like it. We will move forward. Our next item, I believe, is our I-5 mainline design overview.
I'll take this, Dr. Holt. So ESC members, thank you for having me. My name is Steve Drahota. I am the project manager for the design team. And last week, we had a presentation to the HAB about multiple things on the I-5 section, had a little bit of a definition around the auxiliary lanes, and then the functionality of how really the improvements for this project are going to work. And I was asked to bring a snippet of that to today to you guys to talk a little bit about the I-5 cross sections. And this graphic highlights really where the project extents are along I-5, all the way from I-405 to the north, starting basically where that circle is, all the way down to just below I-84 to the south where the lower circle is. And so there's a couple of cross sections that we wanted to take and explain. This is what the width is, and this is how that width was developed. And I think before I do that, I will say that the conversation around what is an auxiliary lane and why are they so important is for another time. If you'd like me to come back to talk about that, I'm happy to do so. One of the key takeaways is for these different cross sections, they really apply between those yellow circles. At the starting and end of the project, you're going to have two southbound and two northbound lanes, just like it is today, that enters and exits this stretch of I-5. So the cross sections that I'll be talking about really have to do with the extent shown in red, and then the entry, ingress, egress points beyond that are exactly like is out there today. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, please. So this graphic, and I'll explain it because it's a little bit busy, really is the typical cross-section as it was derived in the NEPA document, this root width of about 126 feet. And what this 126 feet really is and I'll start with just the right-hand side, which is the northbound direction of I-5, a 12-foot full shoulder and potential bus lane through coordination with TriMet, the two existing 12-foot through lanes, a new 12-foot auxiliary lane, which again is really a dedicated on-ramp, then a lane, and then a dedicated off-ramp. So any vehicle that's in the auxiliary lane would get immediately off at some exit within the project limits, and then a full 12-foot shoulder, safety shoulder on the outside. And so that sums to 60 feet. In the southbound direction, which is on the left-hand side, it really mirrors that same cross-section of a full shoulder on auxiliary lane, two existing through lanes, and then the new inside median. When you sum those two dimensions of 60 feet up, you get 120, and 126 comes because you have a 2-foot barrier on the outside, another 2-foot barrier on the far outside, and then a 2-foot barrier in the median. Now, what we have in this graphic is saying is approximately 126 because, as you can see, you're approaching the Clackamas overcrossing at this particular point, and that median barrier has to move apart to allow that column to exist. And so it's actually a little bit greater than 126 at this point, but where you have that medium come back together, that's what defines the 126. Now, what's interesting about this project is there are so many places where you have some other element that frames into the project. In this particular view, you have the Weidler off-ramp because it's just before the Clackamas overcrossing. You can imagine yourself right next to the Moda Center. Moda Center's on your left-hand side. So you have the Weidler off-ramp, and therefore it needs its lanes to get off the freeway. On the left-hand side, you have the relocated I-5 on-ramp, and therefore its width. And this is really a true pattern across the entire project, where the cross-section has to accommodate the different elements that are framing into I-5. So this 126, that's how it's derived. and it responds to what the elements are in and around it. All right, next slide, please. So what we're going to do next is move a little bit to the north, just before the highway covers. This is a picture of the existing condition as it stands right now. On the right-hand side, you see I-5 northbound, the 2 existing lanes, the narrow inside median, the narrow outside shoulder. And in the southbound direction, you really have the same thing. The narrow inside median, 2 existing through lanes, and then a narrow outside shoulder. Obviously, because you have a bridge here, you need a column in the middle, which is why, as you're looking straight at this, you can see the column framing into a slightly wider barrier system in the median. And at this point, as we start talking about what would it take to construct these highway covers to allow some sort of reuse, redevelopment on top, we have to update this cross-section. So as we go to the next slide, we will see that the cross-section opens up a little bit. Perfect, there we go. To a face-to-face of the walls of 148 feet. And so why 148? Why is this different than the 126 we just talked about on the left side? Well, it's because it has to respond to a median condition and some parameters that are required for a highway cover. And this highway cover is long, to the point where fire life safety systems have to be applied. And therefore, there's some additional space in the upper corners for jet fans or other mechanical electrical ventilation systems that are necessary for such a long highway cover. Some people call it a tunnel at this extent. And the standards really are consistent with standards of a tunnel when it relates to fire life safety and emergency ingress egress. So as you look at the lanes, they're exactly the same as the last picture that I showed, except in this case, we have to make sure there's a fire evacuation zone, that 18 feet in the middle. And that 18 feet has to accommodate an ADA access. So you can imagine those barriers being placed far enough away from the columns so you have ADA egress, basically safety evacuation for the disabled community in the event of a fire. And then on the outsides, there's a little bit of space between the inboard barrier and the face of wall because we have to account for jet fans that go in those upper corners. And so the highway cover has to be designed, and this is both a state, city, and federal requirement, to have enough fire protection systems in the event, small percentage, but in the event that this fire happens somewhere within this highway cover section. All right, next slide, please. All right, so now we're moving a little bit further to the north. And so this is an aerial view of the area in and around the Harriet Tubman Middle School. So you can see that right in the middle of the page. As you look down at I-5, you'll see the existing, especially in the northbound direction, 2 lanes of through traffic and an auxiliary lane. So instead of having a detail on this, we have another picture as we zoom a little bit closer to ground level. So if we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. This is a view as if you're in a vehicle in the going northbound in one of the through lanes. On the left-hand side, you can, again, once again, see the narrow median adjacent to the median barrier. On the right-hand side, there already is one auxiliary lane, and this one serves the I-405 off-ramp. You'll see that as we progress forward into the proposed project, that this is going to turn into actually 2 auxiliary lanes, one for the I-405 and another for Greeley Avenue. Now, one of the things that this does by adding another auxiliary lane in, which is really important because you have such a short merging and weave length, is that we have to take the existing retaining wall, shown in gray in the middle of the page, and shift it about 26 feet up the slope or towards the Harriet Tubman Middle School. It doesn't go, it basically goes, and you'll see it in the next picture, but it basically goes where the fence line is, shown right at the bottom of the black dashed line. So it connects down, and that fence line is about where the proposed new retaining wall would go. Thank you. It preserves the blacktop behind it, basically the access road behind the school, and it sets up the opportunity for some walls either for noise or for air quality, and some other elements. So as we go to the next slide, we'll transition from the existing condition to another cross-section of the proposed condition. So this is that cross-section. And so here, it's about 140 feet, and it's different in the northbound direction, which is on the right, than the southbound direction on the left, in part because you're entering as transition area for the project termini. On the right-hand side, or the northbound direction, these two auxiliary lanes continue moving forward all the way again to the I-405 or to the Greeley Avenue. You can see on the inside the full 12-foot shoulder, and again, potential bus lane because of a TriMet request to preserve the integrity of having a potential transit lane in the future. On the left side, or the southbound direction, this is where we're transitioning from the existing condition, which is shown in that charcoal color up above, where it says outside of project limits. That's really the end of the project in the southbound direction, or conversely, the start of the project. And then the auxiliary lane and the improvements really start from there as you start moving down towards the Broadway off-ramp. If you go to the next slide, there'll be an explanation of what do these different improvements mean to this area. So number one, besides the transportation improvements, the auxiliary lane to I-405 and Greeley, the pair of those, that 12-foot shoulder, again, necessary in case you have a disabled vehicle. You don't want to have a disabled vehicle partway into the lane, so you have that 12-foot shoulder. But there's also the construction of this retaining wall. Now, the slope that's right next to the Harriet Tubman Middle School is highly vulnerable to seismic input demands. And so as a byproduct of this job, that 26-foot shift of the wall from where it was to where it's shown in this picture comes with it, stabilizing that soil wherever that retaining wall is. So it's a natural benefit that comes with that retaining wall. It's going to be designed for the full Cascadia subduction zone earthquake demands that would be put on it, and really sized to make sure that there isn't deflection, which would cause any settlement of the soil behind it. On top of that is where the sound wall would be to reduce the noise levels at least by 5 decibels, and then the potential for some air quality mitigation in and around that wall and then on either side of it. So a lot to be designed in terms of what it means for air quality solutions. We're at the very beginning of that process, but this is the concept, the underlying solution from which these different air quality solutions could be built. And I know you're gonna hear more about air quality analysis and discussions from Grace a little bit later today. And so with that, I think that was the last slide that I have. I know there's so much other good material today. We wanted to keep this short and sweet. And so, and I believe on the next slide, it's open for any questions.
Thanks, Steve. We do have a hand up from Jana Jarvis. Jana, we'll go with you first.
Thank you. I had to remember to put take my mute off. Thank you for the presentation. I am curious, in some cases where there are tunnels, and I'll just share my ignorance with all of you here today, there are limitations on being able to carry hazardous materials through the tunnels, and that's the situation we have on 26. So my question is, with this cover and all that you're going through there, obviously recognizing this is a major trade route essentially for the state, and a lot of different products would be carried down I-5, would that be a constraint?
It's absolutely a design consideration. So when working with FHWA, we asked the question initially, is there a possibility of detouring hazardous materials around this section? And the response was no. I-5 needs to maintain those vehicles. Okay. And so as we developed the concept forward, we said, what is it going to take to have this very large fire event, tanker truck effectively, underneath, and what would it mean from a fire life safety standpoint, whether it's a water suppression system, whether it's a foam suppression system, whether it's a combination of ventilation, what are the ingress egress routes, do you need doorways to get from one portal to the other? We start talking about all of those details. And so every one of those ideas are on the table. There's something called the authority having jurisdiction, AHJ, that will be coming on board later in the year to really start defining what that design criteria is to make sure you have a safe and reliable fire protection system. So We're at the very beginning of it. We have the dimensions and the portal sizes to accommodate those different fire elements. And we're just waiting to really get into some of the design details to ensure that they all work. But the bottom line is all vehicles will be able to progress through the highway covers as it's currently configured.
Thank you. Thank you for your consideration there. Appreciate it.
Questions, others? I see President Peterson.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation, Steve. I appreciate the fact that there were some assumptions made in order to do the EA and that we still have a lot of work to do. But I have a series of questions now based on the fact that I did not realize when we were starting all this that there was a fairly large inside shoulder. So I'm going to ask a few questions and we may not be able to get through all of this today, but they're all questions that lead into the trade-offs that we will need to make in terms of our recommendation, because how wide this footprint is has ramifications on costs as well as mobility and safety and accessibility to all users, both on the highway as well as over the highway. So I just want to be very clear why I'm asking these issues. It's not to, it's to understand why these assumptions were made. And I guess the first one is, why are we making the assumption that the transit will be running on the inside shoulder and that it would be a bus only lane? And did that request come from C-Tran or TriMet? And I just need to understand why at this point. I'm going to go through the questions first. If we were to put the inside shoulder down to a 2-foot safety buffer, which is normally how I've seen it through tight circumstances such as this, what are the safety issues? Then why are there full width shoulders on the ramps? Why are we prioritizing a full width shoulder on the ramps? The double auxiliary lane, I didn't know about that either. I have a question I'd like answered as we go through this. Again, it deals with the trade-offs of the overall footprint of the roadway and what it does to the safety of the main through lanes based on the fact that there's now double auxiliary lanes and the merge weave movements on only the 2 through lanes through that section, and whether we actually get the benefits. So those are my basic 4 questions. But it basically covers how did we get to this full footprint and why? Because that was all basically done before this committee was even put together. Those basic assumptions were made. And we need to drill down into why those basic assumptions were made so that we can start making the trade-offs. Thanks.
Thank you, President Peterson. Steve, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, and then we'll go to Steve Witter. And Bryson, I see your hand. Thank you.
So those are 4 excellent questions. I imagine there's probably 18 excellent questions that are sub-questions to all those. I totally get it. I might defer to the request for the bus lane to Megan. I will say this, though. We did look at what would it mean to have a bus lane on the outside shoulder, the traditional outside shoulder, or the right side. And because of the number of off-ramps, on-ramps, the buses, as we were talking to TriMet, had to continue to move into a lane and then move back out to a shoulder, then back into a lane. So it was because of the number of off-ramps that the recommendation was keep it to the inside median. And so that was the starting point for it. I don't have all the details about how the conversations progressed. And so Megan, I might punt that one back to you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And really good question. Thank you, President Peterson. So the bus on shoulder really came from a Region 1 effort that started to look at opportunities holistically in the region for bus on shoulder, from which pilot project took off on I-205, the Glen Jackson Bridge, and is under development for a portion of I-5 to the south. And really based on coordination with our transit partners, TriMet and C-Tran, thinking more holistically around the future of the I-5 corridor. So that was how bus on shoulder came to be. And with the opportunity that we have in Rose Quarter, this with this section originally being constructed in the 60s and hasn't been significantly improved since, it was our chance to make sure that we were providing an opportunity for that bus on shoulder moving forward. So that was the impetus and sort of where bus on shoulder came from, as well as the understanding from stakeholders to ensure that we're providing multimodal benefits as part of the project, transit very much included.
Thank you very much.
And I will say that some of the other questions are a little more nuanced, or the responses are pretty nuanced. I'd almost recommend that we come back with a focused conversation that addresses these questions exactly. The one that I can say, you asked a question about a smaller inside median shoulder, 2 feet, 4 feet, whatever the number is. That's exactly the location we're talking about bus on shoulder. But besides that point, the concept really came down to the safety corridor. And there's a number of crashes that exist throughout the extent, both northbound, southbound, because of short merge lanes, weave lanes, and partially because we already have narrow shoulders to begin with. So these disabled vehicles partially extend into a travel lane. And so it's that combination of trying to resolve this as the highest crash corridor in the freeway system in Oregon that led to the dimensions that we have. I think there were obviously conversations to be had about the exact dimensions, and we can follow up and answer all your questions. They're all completely valid, and I think we owe it to be able to talk about every single one of them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And so we'll make sure to schedule the response in this arena to do so. Steve Witter, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. Just to let my fellow panel committee members know, I was on the telephone during the public comment period and just had trouble with my computer restarting. I know that's never happened to anyone else here. I appreciate President Peterson's questions, and frankly, 2 minutes before this meeting, my team sort of gave me a heads up that this interior 12-foot bus lane was going to show up. And there are lots of people at TriMet working with ODOT on this project, and as you guys can imagine, different inputs coming in, but I'm not exactly sure, President Peterson, why this is there. I do recall my own input, which early on to my team was, if we're going to have structures, if we're rebuilding structures, maybe we might want to think about where the abutments are in case of a future transit line in the future. And frankly, I was thinking about the I-205 kind of busway that was kind of there, kind of ready to go. We don't operate a bus on shoulder, so I realize that it's the Office of Mobility that's driving this, but it's a little bit of an awkward moment, I have to say, because I'm not exactly sure why TriMet is driving for this, this particular lane. And if my ODOT colleagues are surprised by that, I'd be happy to help follow the path back in my own organization.
Sure. Well, Steve, why don't I jump in there, Dr. Holt? Yeah, the initial conversation happened with Mr. Bottomley. Sorry, Dr. Holt, can you mute? Thank you, sir. The original conversation started with Bernie, and actually the bigger opportunity is with C-Tran. They're have been more interested and can show more, you know, they can hit the ground running on that. They already operate bus on shoulder. Sean Donegan showed a lot of the enthusiasm for that being a part of the project. So obviously we've looked at some opportunities. We've talked to some of your planning folks, Tom, Dan Marchand, others that have told us that there's some possibilities there, Steve. So Steve, why don't we may have to take this offline with you and dig a little bit more down on the details. We have been in those discussions with your teams for almost a year now. So sorry you weren't brought up to speed on that.
Brendan, I'm curious at this point, given President Peterson's comments in this particular piece of the presentation, which I have a feeling could run a lot of clock, that we definitely expand on this dialogue. And more importantly, I think at the point when that takes place, I would personally like to hear from C-Tran just about how this fits and works with whatever it is they're doing. Because the one thing that makes me think that I think about is, what happens if the bus shoulder lane, if something like an emergency happens and you're on the inside lane, right? Like something bad. Now you have people getting out of a bus and they have nowhere to go. I'm just trying to figure out, like, with that lane on the inside, how are we, have we thought about all those different potential issues as it ties into a bus running on that particular inside lane?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let's let Megan chime in because the technical team has been diving into these details, and obviously, if it's the wish of the ESC, we're going to bring all those forward. So, Megan, anything to add there? Just based on, I don't want to have the conversation get too confused here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vice Chair, that's exactly sort of the type of question that we are exploring at this design phase. So it's the safety components, but it's also looking at the traffic volumes. It's looking at the ramp spacing, the volume of sort of on and off movements with those ramps as well as it relates to the design. And so as you can imagine, on the outside shoulder with the on and off ramps very closely spaced, we have that safety challenge. And then on the inside shoulder, there's the consideration that you brought up. So those are all of the things that our team is starting to dig into in terms of what the design and need would be for the shoulders for bus on shoulder.
Well, it's clear that there's need for us to spend some time in robust conversation around these items. Bryson, you've had your hand up. I want to make sure we get another chance to get to you.
Yeah, so my question's sort of related, and it's the width of that medium piece where the support barriers go. How does the lane width factor into the basically the load capability of the covers? How much load the covers can hold? Is widening that shoulder lane taking away some of our support ability from the covers?
Take that one, Megan. So the simple answer is yes. The longer the span length, and whatever a load is means a deeper structure. And so what you compensate for a longer span by going deeper, and then you have to adjust either your I-5 profile down or your top of cover up, and then therefore tie into the local street network on either side. So there is very much a dependency on understanding what the load is, and that's in part a highway cover use question, what the span length is that you need to support that load, and then how to support that through your column or pier down in your foundation system. So they're all interrelated. Not to mention, again, some of these other fire life safety systems that need its own space, regardless of how wide it is, just because of the length of the highway cover. So they're all tied together. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to show this cross-section as early as we are, have these conversations, dive into these conceptual designs, and then refine it going forward. Hopefully I answered your question, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I was just kind of to follow up a little bit. How much of the load capacity considerations went into coming up with the initial cross section?
Oh, okay, great question. So we had to make some guesses on what was loading on top using these widths. So we took a series of different loading conditions and then applied them to come up with what the structure depth was for the bridge itself, the highway cover, which is really just another form of a long bridge. And so it all went into the preliminary analysis. So we have concept analysis done, primed and ready for these kind of conversations to hone the widths, and then we'll go back and run through that whole process again.
Well, I appreciate it. As identified, this is something that really needs some time on its own. And as the ESC has just articulated a desire for that to happen, we'll make sure that that gets scheduled into our next meeting so that there's concentrated time to have this discussion. In light of the time that we're at, I'd like to move to our next topic in our project updates. So, and that's on our air quality recap.
Yep. So Dr. Holt and executive steering committee members, thank you. So this portion of our project update is really a direct response to questions that you've had around the project and air quality and noise and climate change. So today I am joined with Grace Kruniken, who was the facilitator of the environmental peer review. and a few members of her esteemed panel of experts that will be providing some more information about the project's technical evaluation and findings on these topics. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the environmental assessment process, and then I will turn it over to Grace and her team to provide more detail. So next slide, please. So during the environmental review phase, in addition to the stakeholder outreach that was done, we did have formal coordination with national, state, and local agencies as we were developing the analysis. So our federal lead agency was the Federal Highway Administration. And then below you can see our cooperating and participating agencies in the NEPA process. Each of these agencies had an opportunity to shape our agency coordination plan, so how we would be coordinating with one another, as well as providing feedback on the methodology for each of the technical analyses, reviewing technical reports, and then providing advanced input on the assessment process. So next slide. So now you know the who, but as background, here's the timeline. So this timeline summarizes the key milestones in the environmental review phase, including the environmental peer review. So stepping back a couple years, the environmental review phase kicked off in 2017, and the environmental assessment following that technical report development was published in February of 2019 for a 45-day public comment period. And in response to comments and stakeholder concerns that we received regarding air quality, as well as greenhouse gas emissions and noise, the Oregon Transportation Commission directed us as ODOT to conduct an environmental peer review associated with the environmental assessment and those specific topic areas. And so this peer review then was conducted in spring of 2020. And informed the publication of the finding of no significant impact and revised environmental assessment in November of 2020. And those documents combined are the document that completes the environmental process. So next slide. The environmental assessment evaluated a range of technical topics. So they are all listed here on the slide. And in addition to air quality, noise, and climate change, which we are focused on today, I just wanted to highlight that the assessment evaluated the project's impacts around transportation and other environmental resources, health, heritage, socioeconomics, and the built environment. So next slide. In terms of the findings, so we took a scientific approach that was really guided by federal and state standards. And with that, the environmental assessment found that air quality and greenhouse gas emissions would slightly improve with the project. So meaning the air will be better with the project built as compared to not building the project. And that noise would be mitigated by the construction of the sound walls. So you saw those highlighted in Steve Drahoda's presentation. Specifically with a sound wall proposed at Harriet Tubman Middle School. So we hired Grace Kroniken to take a look at these findings and the assessments and develop and lead an environmental peer review process, again, specifically focused on these topics. And so under Grace's leadership, we turned to the expertise of the peer review panel of national experts to review the findings and provide recommendations. And so I will now turn it over to Grace to share more about that process and the findings and recommendations. So Grace, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Dr. Holt. I have with me 3 of the panel members, and I wanted to start by introducing them. Song Bai is not only an expert, but he's also a father. Probably in an area that he's not an expert in if you ask his kids, but he's on the phone because I believe they're en route. So Song Bai is on the phone and I will ask him to be available for questions. He has asked me to do what he normally does, which is give the air quality report. So I will summarize his points in the air quality report just because of technical difficulties on communication. And then all questions Song would like to take himself. We had also Andrew Elbert, who is with the Volpe Center, Transportation Center in Boston, who is also an air quality expert. And then Deborah Jew, who is with Wilson Ehrig down in San Francisco. And Wilson Ehrig is one of the best noise firms I know. They're a specialty in noise. They don't do other things. Dr. Beverly Scott understands transportation management and community impacts and is a little mouthy at times, and I thought the panel could use Dr. Scott. Tim Sexton, I guess I should start by saying the ODOT recommended a panel of 6 or 8, I forget how many experts to review that I would just be the coordinator for, and I thanked them for their efforts, but I thought we should get our own experts, and so we invited off, they were all DOT, Department of Transportation representatives, and the only one I kept was Tim Sexton. No offense to the others that they had suggested. I'm sure they were all good. Minnesota has a really good approach to some of these issues, and so and Tim had spent some time in Washington State as well, and so Tim was on there. And then Dr. Charles Shamoun, who is a lawyer and has helped write the code in New York City. They have a really incredible noise code in New York City that came up over and over again as I was interviewing around for panels to have. So I selected the panel, they did all the work, and I listened to them and wrote the report. If we could go to the project partner participation side of things, we invited as many partners as we thought would be interested in watching what's going on. And so Portland Public Schools, City of Portland, and Metro were all invited to observe, as were Multnomah County and Albina Vision Trust. The last 2 were unable to attend participation in the meetings. And so we just went ahead with the input from the other 3. And they were very helpful. And we got the sense of what the issues were from the community. We also had full access to the public comments. So we read the comments that had been given and understood the, I'll call it Stop the Freeway group, the folks that are worried about reparations in the community and other things. So we had, I think, a good process. We convened, we asked a bunch of questions. We all read the EIS. That was clear from the participation of the panelists, the EA, excuse me. And then we had a back and forth with ODOT on questions, and the panel drew up its own comments and its own report. And I'm going to give you the punchline, but I'm going to ask both Deborah and Song, and in this case, me for Song, to give you the comments that were there. But we focused our thinking on 3 different areas. One is the methodology. Next slide, please. There you go. One was the methodology used by ODOT correct in all 3 categories of air, noise, and greenhouse gas? Was the environmental assessment analysis done correctly? And then was the mitigation that was proposed the proper mitigation given the facts that stem from number 1 and number 2? And then the last comment there is the panel offered some unsolicited advice, which I'm going to ask Beverly to summarize at the end of this. But we came up with suggestions all the way through, which I'm sure ODOT appreciated greatly. The scope of the peer review, as I said, is on air quality, noise, and greenhouse gas. And you'll see when we get to the end that greenhouse gas was we were a little less able to provide much input on that. But next slide. So a consensus of the panel, and there was pretty much unanimity on every step of the way. But overall, the overall thing is that the environmental assessment accurately and adequately address noise and air quality requirements. The second comment is that NEPA has no specific requirements on greenhouse gas, but we really gave ODOT kudos for making the effort to try and capture it. Most of the data on the greenhouse gas came from the air quality analysis for the most part, but there were some separations, and ODOT did a nice job of making some efforts in that regard. And, you know, it's something for all of us professionals to look for in the future, because climate is one of those key issues we have to address. The third point here is that the construction impacts of the project were not included in the report, and ODOT has a separate step. And I think, if anything, the committee really wanted to emphasize that next step of construction impacts be taken. And I don't know if they've already been taken or not. I haven't tried to stay up with Megan on this, but that the community, whatever is built, the protection needs to be given the community during those periods, that period of time that it's under construction. And there was a lot of advice provided ODOT in that regard. And anyway, I think it's enough said there. And then we also, again, noted the comments that Dr. Bev Scott is going to provide on that we think will help with restorative justice issues and reconnecting the community. This report was put together long before well, not long before, probably just before the George Floyd shooting. And all of our concerns have only been enhanced over the last year as the country has wrestled with, as Dr. Holt said in the beginning of this, trying to deal with reparations directly related to the community. So with that, I'm going to get to the air quality findings. And I want to thank Song for all of his work. Song heads up the work at the Bay Area Air Quality Agency, and they're known nationally for their high quality work. The first thing to get clear is that Portland is in transportation conformity within the state with the state implementation plan. So ODOT does not even need to do project level analysis. The hotspot conformity analysis is not required of them. The second thing is that NEPA requires some analysis, and ODOT properly looked at the mobile source air toxic emissions assessment, properly conducted it. We looked at the model that they used, the methodology that they used, and thought that it was all appropriately done. The results were that the air quality will be slightly better under the built project than it is under the current conditions. There's, I think, A and B represent the committee's extra efforts to try and find something to be critical of in this regard. And the A point here about the diesel particulate matter, DPM in the business, that the diesel particulate matter was properly done, but when ODOT wrote their document, they highlighted to the public the benzene as an example, the benzene comments. And Song really wanted to let everyone know that DPM is particularly important. And the reason it is when we go into construction, he wanted to point out, and we all did, but the panel look at the particularly trucks and any diesel particulate matter that's generated, and that they properly treat that. That said, everything ODOT did was appropriate, and the conclusions they drew were appropriate. This is sort of an editor's comment more than anything else, not that significant to the findings of the overall review. And then construction activity is noted here that I've made that point. Let's go on to the next piece. Here again, ODOT properly concluded that no mitigation was required, and that's based on a good analysis that was done. Now let's go on to the noise findings. Today we have with us Deborah Jew, who I said was with Wilson Erig, whom a very highly regarded firm. And Deborah, I'm going to ask you to lead us through these findings, if you would.
Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon. So our peer review of the noise analysis found that the methodology, point number one, the methodology was correct, and point number two, the analysis was properly conducted. And as Grace mentioned, we found opportunities to provide some constructive comments regarding various parts of the analysis. And as noted here, the technical report was hard to understand, and it was a little hard for me to navigate. So couldn't imagine what someone else would be trying to do. And then we also had comments on construction. I'll have a third slide. We'll talk about some specific aspects of construction that we would like, we recommended that ODOT look at during their construction noise analysis. On the third point, in regards to mitigation, the two walls that were proposed, walls 2B and 4B, 2B protects the Tubman, Harriet Tubman Middle School and the Lewis Albina Park. 2B, yes, sorry, got myself switched around. They properly meet the performance criteria for sound walls in a per federal and state standards. So they are feasible and reasonable. And we did have some additional suggestions. 2B perhaps could be moved a little closer to the school, and that would provide a little bit more noise protection. Recognizing that there are some constraints perhaps with the retaining wall and other aspects discussed earlier. And then sound wall 1, which was not proposed, we thought that the cost analysis could be updated. The state's allowance for construction costs seemed a little out of date. And so we had suggested that ODOT could take another look at that and reconsider whether sound wall 1 might meet the feasible and reasonable criteria. Next slide. And then back to the construction. As Grace mentioned, there's a lot of, construction noise is temporary, but it can last a long time in communities. And the New York City noise ordinance was developed in response to a lot of construction projects going on in that city. And there are other places that we looked, ODOT also has some construction provisions, and that we encourage that all of them be considered. A couple of, including some considerations for temporary barriers. And then item number 3 and number 7 actually could be, and number 6 could be considered actually for the ongoing project, not just the construction phase. Perhaps quiet pavement could be something considered along the roadway, and then being a little more creative with the sound wall designs and features to maximize performance. So those are the findings.
Okay, next. Again, on behalf of Song, I will say the models that were used, the MOVES model and the infrastructure carbon estimator, are state of the art. It's what was recommended out of the Volpe Center and others, national experts. So ODOT did a good job in doing the best they could to try and capture greenhouse gas findings, but there aren't standards against which we can measure or say that they've fell high or low, other than the air quality standards, and they did a good job on the air quality standards. So we just noted it was a good effort on their part, and there is no mitigation that was proposed and no additional mitigation that was proposed by the panel. Next slide. So just as a summary of other considerations before I ask Dr. Scott to go through the item 3, I've pointed this out, but I guess let me start with number 1. The EA as a standalone document was accurately done, adequately done. It provided some mitigation. The mitigation is accurate, and the panel concluded that as this tension that's out there in the community, and we did read the customer comments, the comments that were made on the environmental assessment. The issues of stop the freeway, the issues of the community are sort of the 2 groupings that are there, what I'll call the violated community, if you will, and the directly affected community. And we would recommend, instead of trying to get to a higher level EIS, that the EA was adequate. Some even commented that a categorical exclusion, which is a lesser document than an environmental document, than an environmental assessment, was a possible alternative ODOT could have pursued. Nobody recommended that we move to the EIS stage. There was nothing in the findings that would indicate that's the appropriate place to go, but instead recommended that instead of fighting that out for 3 years and generating 3 years worth of inflation and costs of doing some extraordinary environmental assessment, that it'd be better off to fight it out and try and take that, say, $60 million and pour it back into the community. That was definitely the interest on the part of the committee. The construction activity is another area altogether. The committee really focused on this, and maybe it's because ODOT hadn't completed their work in this area, so that we couldn't look at it, but we're really worried about construction can go on for a long time, and whether it's noise or diesel, if the contracts are put together properly, you can require not just quiet equipment, but you can require upgraded equipment as the time goes on, or the changing of filters. And there needs to be a 24-hour complaint line so that when people hear something at 2 o'clock in the morning on a, Tuesday night, they don't have to wait till 10 in the morning for someone to come to the office to pick up the line to ask what's going on. So on behalf of the community, there can just be a responsible party running the project, or there can be someone who said, fill out a form, we'll be happy to talk to you later. And every committee member has had some experience or another where this can be mandated, and ODOT can pay for this, but they've got to put it in the contract, and they've got to staff up for this so that the community is tended to during this very tender time, because yet another violation will be brought on the community if you take this scar that, we split apart North Portland with this project in the first place, and you can ruin their lives for another 3 years or however long the project takes. Sorry, Megan, I'm sure you'll do it as quickly as possible, but that construction period, no one has really talked about that construction period, and the committee really raised a lot of red flags. And then there's just the issue of restorative justice and what can happen to repair or to forgive or to ask for atonement or to provide for the sins. Sorry to bring in the religious connotation here, but the community needs some healing, and the lid was a really great, the covering was a really great start, and not every highway department will do that. I certainly couldn't get WashDOT to. I'm sure it would have been better if Lynn Peterson had been the WashDOT head when I was in Seattle, but we could not get WashDOT to even give us a time of day to talk about covering I-5 in Seattle. And so the fact that it was included as a part of the project was a great step ahead, so much so that you have to worry about the mitigation of this proposed action they're taking, and mitigate for what I consider a mitigation in the bigger picture. That's a great step ahead, ODOT, but you can undo a lot of that greatness that you're providing if you're not taking care of the community during this interim period. And people live right next to the project. This isn't, I can hear it from a mile away. This is right next to the project. So with that, we came up with a lot of other discussions on restorative justice, and I'd like Dr. Bev Scott, to say a little bit about that. Dr. Scott?
Okay, thank you very much, Grace. Well, one thing, and I'm not trying to be in any, I'm just calling it straight. It was an honor to work on this project, okay? And the reason that it was an honor was because I've never seen, at least in terms of the written and the statements that have been made, a community, and I've worked enough of them, where it seems like there is a common understanding, no foolishness, that this is a community that has been tattooed through the years, has been violated, and we all, and Chairman Simpson, to your point, this is not just about a ODOT project. This is about what we can collectively do as a we, and are gonna have to collectively do. And this provides a catalytic opportunity to be transformative. So having said that, I said, look, I wanna be real clear about the data behind the facts on the air quality and all that, exactly what Grace said. Does it meet the requirements? I'm absolutely convinced it meets the requirements. But what I read in the volumes of, and thank you, backup, was that the community, you could do you could do planning, NEPAs, all you want. People were talking about jobs, they were talking about economics, they were talking about business development, they were talking about, in the real sense of restorative justice. Yes, the specifics of the project are absolutely critical, but the totality of what we are talking about is really about community building in its biggest sense. And you can do 1,000 of these and you're not going to get, and that wouldn't get you there. So this is what I just said. What would you do? These are things I said, number one, and I'm saying this, and we have never had this conversation directly with TriMet, but I said, look, those electric buses that are coming in, you talk about concrete things that we can wind up doing. I don't know what their plan of action is. I would take them electric buses and I could almost tell you, you got them, okay? So that, this is, we're talking about less noise. We're talking about real stuff. We're talking about less noise. We're talking about zero emissions. We're talking about really, this is the forward facing. My daddy used to say, I can show you better than I can tell you. So I'm gonna show you how much it means to us. Those buses, and now you got to understand they're not the first generation, but I'm just saying that I don't want to overdo it, but that would be definitely a piece that I would say, This is no fooling. This is where they're going. Okay.
Well, Bev, and what's important here is the diesel. I didn't give you a proper introduction. She's headed up 5 major agencies around the country: Houston, Atlanta, Boston, you name it. It's the diesel that you're taking out of the diesel bus out of the neighborhood, and the noise from the diesel bus.
And the noise is from it and everything.
Particulate.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Grace.
Right,
so
boss.
this is
Go
like
ahead.
you getting it like in bam, 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 bam. Okay. Then the other part of it is that no question during construction, just like Grace and others have said, the devil will be in the details. Okay. And so really you're not at that point yet, but I'm talking about what will travel times be, how are people going to get from here to there, what's the lighting associated. I mean, so the detail around what happens during that construction period for movements and all of that is going to have to be, all that's going to have to be very well laid out. Definitely want to really pump up whatever is happening in terms of safe routes to schools. We're going to have to make sure that that's got on double steroids. This is this whole thing. Devil will be in the details. I know everybody says stay away from this sacred cow. I'm just giving it to you like it is. A whole area of active transportation, okay? And that is universal access as well as the biking thing. Been there, done that, lived it, and living it right now. Gentrification, oh my God, who's got... The bottom line is everybody needs active transportation. Now that needs to be done, understanding the environmental justice pieces, because I would tell people all the time, yeah, well, the bikes are coming, but they ain't coming in my neighborhood, okay? The unbanked and all that. We can get through all of that, okay? But that needs to be on the plate, and we can bring the same intentionality and do it the absolute best to make sure that all of these issues wind up getting addressed, okay? And then I would say to you that on the whole, utilize this as an opportunity to wind up being able to do jobs creation. There were issues about local preference. At the time we wrote this, quite candidly, the Trump administration had taken away the pilot on local preference. The Biden administration is going to put it back in probably about just a week and a half ago in Chicago. You had a major convening of mayors from across the country who were all there, all on the issue of getting the local preference back in so that you can do local hire and you can start doing some of those things. So I'm just saying there are all kinds of opportunities, but you would not just be doing it. This is where the togetherness is so important. You're talking about you really moving things. So to really wind up being able to do a big jobs piece that is not just about this project and a big business piece, that's where having the integrated program of projects, which to me was so exciting, they're in various of the plans and reports, okay? Pulling all that together as looking at it in 3 dimensions so that we're real clear about what a totality of opportunities look like across the different agencies over maybe a 10-year period of time. What does that look like compounded? Because those are the kinds of things that businesses go in for. You're talking about one little thing when I can really see what the total commitment is. And because everybody's been saying the same thing, and I think you made a good strike at it at the time we did our report. The ODOT commission had just had its meeting, I think, where they had, because we were talking about you really need to have CEO level engagement to be able to do a lot of the stuff and all that. They had actually had a meeting and set up some structures that were decision-making structures or looking at all the project. I'm a little distant from it now, but it already looked like they had started that process of bringing the multiple stakeholders together, understanding that this was going to take. It's me, ODOT owns this, but it's a collective. And I would also tell you, I'm a proponent of community benefits agreements, and you all have done them in your area because I always say trust and verify, okay? And so if these things are important, let's institutionalize them because people leave office and they go on. And sometimes you say, it's like I played it again, Sam. So community benefits agreements, but that's not anything new here because in my research, you've already done community benefits agreements, okay? So I don't want to overdo it, but that's the kind of, we just sat down, rolled our shirt sleeves up and said, look, this is what you gotta do, but this is about much more than what you gotta do. What do you want to do? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Scott.
So that's
Thank
fair.
you. I appreciate it. It's excellent. It's so insightful. We appreciate the report. Thank you, Grace. Also, I want to go to Q&A. Obviously, there's much more that could be communicated. Thorough communication. We appreciate it so much. Questions, comments from our executive steering committee members?
I have a question. This is Julia from Edwards.
Hi, Julia.
May I go ahead?
Yes.
Hi. I'll just put the question out there, and whoever is appropriate can answer. So as part of today's presentations, we've seen that the freeway will move 26 feet closer to Harriet Tubman, already very close, but 26 feet closer. And then the statement was made that the air quality will be better. And we know that the air quality is bad now for the students and community members who are at Tubman. So the question is less about is it better, but is it healthy and appropriate for youth and others to be outside on the school grounds, walking to school with that particular level of air quality.
Song, I'll let you get on the line, and if someone can clear him up. Julia, I would, Song, you're on. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So first of all, I apologize that I cannot show my face, and then I was on travel and then can only call in. I heard the question. I think the question is talking about like how we understand the evaluation results say, well, the air quality project scale is better. I do want to highlight the major assessment being done and also being required under both EPA and the federal highway guidance is the comparison between two scenarios. One scenario is the build scenario in a future planning horizon year. The other scenario is the no build scenario, meaning there's no such project. The congestion will continue to going on. So in terms of the assessment, the emission side, it's not uncommon to anticipate that a project, even it's a freeway related project, if the capacity is not having substantial increase, the fleet turnover impact will overwhelm the VMT increase, and then end up like in a future year, the emissions will be going down. So that is the general comparison under EPA and the federal highway guidance. For example, for mobile source air toxics, we may see emissions going down for the build scenario because of the improved traffic operation conditions, and the fleet basically per activity emissions are going down much larger than the VMT increase. So I just want to highlight that is the general rationale for the scenario comparison.
So
in terms of the, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Song, sorry.
Yeah, the other thing is for the concentration part, like what is the real impact, right? The health impact, or that's based on the concentration levels. Of course, if the sensitive receptors, for example, residential areas, if they are closer to the source, then the air quality impact is bigger. That's just physics. I mean, you are closer to the source, and then the air quality impact is bigger. But the analysis is actually based on the combination of the background concentration plus the project impact, meaning it's a total impact. And then going back to the point, that's why the review comment that Grace highlighted earlier about the general hotspot analysis requirement not being required in the Portland area, because the overall attainment status in Portland is not really triggering any specific hotspot project scale analysis. So then this project in EA, this type of a hotspot like concentration level assessment is not performed, and it's not required because you have to combine with the regional overall the air quality level to have the full assessment like that.
Thank
So
you.
Did I address the question sufficiently, or anyone want to?
Actually, it didn't answer my question. I'm sorry. It was informative, which I appreciate. I mean, it does cause me concern when you say the closer you are, obviously the bigger the impact, because we're now 26 feet closer than an already very close proximity. But I'm not, and I know it may not be required. I guess what I'm asking is it healthy? Is the air quality healthy enough for young people to be in its immediate proximity for any length of time?
So Julia, we weren't charged with looking at that. So you're going to have to take that to the bigger committee. But to summarize, the vehicle mix fleet in the country is going to make the air quality better. And that's why it affects the number. So you can go up a little bit in VMT. And because each year, assuming the Biden administration changes the rules and that the Trump administration changed, but assuming that the vehicle fleet continues to get better and better with the mix of electric and hybrid and low emission fuels, that's what makes the project air quality better. The specifics of the building also was noted in the report that you guys, Portland Public Schools has already done a lot to put in the air filters systems there. So you took care of the building. Whether it's healthy to be outside on the playground or not is something that is not within the scope of this study.
Right. Well, I guess it's within the scope of the community conversation, and I appreciate that. And yes, PPS did put $20 million into sort of indoor air quality.
Right.
But they're middle school kids, and they certainly have to get there, and they spend time outside. So our issue has always been not is it like incrementally better because it's already bad. So like incrementally better from bad is not where I'd want my kid to be. So just to clarify, and or I guess to summarize, this isn't a point that you looked at. It was primarily, is it better than it, are we projecting it better than it would have been? Not, is it actually, especially with the freeway moving closer to the school, is it the air quality that is deemed healthy enough for kids to be outside, just to use layman's terms? And if that was outside the scope, then you can say that. Is that my understanding, that you're saying that wasn't within your scope to decide whether that was
the project
particular health standard?
The EA took into account the fact that the freeway was changing, and so the scope of the freeway move toward the building was taken into account with the conclusions that are here. Whether you'd want to pick a place next to a freeway to put a school is a separate question altogether. Not an irresponsible one, a very responsible one to have. But the air quality gets better in general because of the fleet mix, even with the project there. Dr. Holt?
Absolutely. And Julia, we're going to have some time to talk about PPS. You're on the agenda today, so maybe we can come back a little bit to this. It's obviously something we're all very concerned about and look forward to really laying in to the conversation around PPS. So thanks, Julia. If you can hold for a moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Holt. If we could make
Absolutely.
sure that we circulate the material, just because we'd like to share that with our health and safety team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Bryson, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so just kind of it's a little bit of a follow-up to the question that Julia just asked, which is, this presentation and this work is all kind of, the project, does it meet the minimum requirements? Is it legally sound, that sort of thing? And maybe this is more of a question for ODOT, which is, if we had done things like, do an environmental impact study beforehand or other sorts of things to look deeply into this, would we be able to have a little bit more information to address some of the questions, concerns that have come up from the community on various different components?
Bryson, I can take this one. So the level of evaluation for the environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement would have been the same. in terms of the methodology and the sort of federal and state guidelines. But it's this type of table, the executive steering committee, the work that we're doing with our historic Albina advisory board to understand those community needs and values and opportunities moving forward. Like, that's the space where we get to have that conversation around the the enhanced mitigation, the betterments. So I know that Dr. Scott spoke to that as well, and that was a key takeaway from the peer review report.
Thank you very much. Steve Witter.
2 mouses, 2 computers, and 2 mute buttons. Sorry about that. I just wanted to really reinforce what Grace said about placing community expectations inside the construction contract. You guys are using a CMGC method that is negotiating everything down to, you know, nickels and dimes at the very end. And what I would say is it's a great opportunity for the community to have input in how the construction takes place. And that has everything to do from work hours, weekends, to traffic control plans and business support services. So I just want to really double down on what Grace says, get it in the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Nate McCoy.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. And I want to also appreciate the panel today. I thought it was great information. And in particular, I want to thank Beverly for her comments. And it does weave into Steve's comments around the contractual agreements and how you really stand up community and how involved they are. And I hate to say this, and ODOT is definitely a valued partner, and not the only one that this comment is directed towards. But what Beverly is saying has been on the record now for over 3 years. And if we're talking about real restorative justice, and if we're talking about real economics around workforce, I mean, I know I've mentioned it at least 5 different times, that it would be nice to just, as much as we talk about CAPS analysis, is to do a workforce analysis around this dang project that is supposed to be catalytic, that is supposed to really help, embrace the community. And we got young people who are unemployed, who are in the streets shooting each other. And yet we can't even talk about what the local preference is, what the hell we're doing around creating these jobs. And I just keep coming every month, hoping that maybe something will pop up. And again, I've been down this conversation for over 14 years in construction, and we always are reactive instead of proactive. And I just feel like we're going to miss a big opportunity if we keep on having kind of the same usual conversations every month. And at some point, I got to decide if my time here with everybody is actually valued, because I could be a lot of other places, and not that, NAMAC and Nate is that sought after, but I'm coming because I'm seeing a problem right now. And it starts to burn me up a little bit, that I just feel like we're not really, it's the egg and shell game. I feel like we're doing the long-term stuff, but there's a lot of short-term stuff that we can do. So I'm gonna repeat it one more time, and I hope somebody will respond. I've looked at the BOLI data for Bureau of Labor Industries, 2019, 2020 projections. They have lackluster people of color in the trades right now that would be deployed for this ODOT project. And I just can't understand why we can't look at numbers, see what we're doing, think about some of the stuff Beverly just mentioned. Do we need local preference hiring? Like, it seems like this isn't hard work. If I can pull data, and I know ODOT works with BOLI, I would love Val, who is the new, commissioner, to attend a meeting, and let's talk about that on one of these agendas. Because I just feel like there's the community saying this stuff, but I don't know if we're all responding to the stuff the community is asking for. So I just wanted to put that on record. So appreciate the conversation today, and thank you, Beverly, for dropping the mic on us today in the meeting.
Chair Simpson.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nate. And I appreciate Auntie Beverly's passion that came out just now, because this is an economic conversation. I mean, if we're not talking economics, then how is restorative part of this dialogue? And so I think just to kind of address what you're saying, Nate, because you do need to be at this table and your perspective is valued, and you are a generational Black resident within the Black community, in the Portland community for that matter. And your point is valid, and that needs to be a premise of the conversation, because as Beverly alluded to, we can come up with every plan and process you can imagine, and it's still not going to be perfect. And that's the problem with Portland, is all we do is plan and process and talk and meet, and no one ever actually just says, go do it. There's a couple of leaders around here that are very bold, some on this call, but a lot of people just really like to talk. And so when you talk, you don't really get anything actually done. And so I think for that matter, we do want to obviously address these environmental concerns, but we need to just figure out holistically as we approach this project. It's just one formula I use internally within my business or any room that I walk into. It's just the triple bottom line. Does it address your environmental issues, your economic concerns, and the social matters? And I think as it pertains to this project, I feel like we're on the road to doing that, but I do feel like we've been concentrating all of our focus on one leg to the stool. And obviously we have time to continue to have these meetings, but we need to start figuring out that transition and pivot into these conversations as it pertains to the social needs and economic needs for this particular demographic or this particular part of the community which we're talking about, we care about so much. And I would just attest to the point that I'm very passionate about, as Nate alluded to earlier, that there are young Black males dying every day in the streets at the hands of each other. And that doesn't make any logical sense while we're sitting back talking about these little bitty issues on a highway, yet Black lives matter. So we need to figure out if it really does matter. And if it does, we need to figure out how we're going to get those kids off the streets killing each other and put them into a position where they're actually contributing taxpayers to this local economy, uplift them, support them so they can build generational wealth and get out of this paradigm of oppression and despair. And so I know that's a mouthful to say that this is just a highway enhancement project, but ultimately it is one important element that we keep skipping over to talk about things that are not directly tied to the phrase restorative justice. And so if we are going to use that term, let's start mapping out what are our concrete steps as to how we get there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's powerful and necessary and pertinent. There is one other piece, and while I don't want to skirt past any of this, it's something that we need to weigh in on and spend time on an appropriate meeting discussion in this format as well as behind the scenes, which is what many of us have been doing and are doing. It's something we're extremely concerned about to make this real. There was a question, I don't know, that was answered or not. I want to make sure that we respond to one of the questions that Julia mentioned. And so in their moment, because they have the space on the agenda, I want to make sure we touch on that. But we're going to move forward and we're going to go to the next item. Thank you, all of you who presented. We look forward to continuing to engage and interact with you. As I mentioned, today was going to be one of robust discussion. There's much for us to talk about, and we fully understand that this project, while cannot solve all of our problems, it creates great opportunity for us to be intentional, strategic, and connecting in this space. So I'll go to the Urban Mobility Office update with Brendan Finn.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. Well, that's going to be tough to follow up Dr. Scott and Grace there, but I'll do my best. And knowing that we're a little bit behind schedule, Dr. Holt, my elevator speech will only go a couple of floors. So we'll try to make this crisp to get us back on schedule. Well, thank you, fellow committee members, Chair Simpson, for giving us just a little bit of time. Again, we'll try to be pretty exercise brevity here in our presentation so we can move on to some of the other pieces in the agenda. But there's some important concepts and context we want to set around our work in the Urban Mobility Office and how it relates to the Rose Quarter Improvement Project. And also some things we need to kind of put on the record so people can understand kind of where we're coming from with the Comprehensive Congestion Management and Mobility Plan. So thanks again for a little bit of time. I'm joined by my colleague, Lucinda Broussard, who is the Oregon Toll Program Director. I'm going to turn it over to her in just a brief moment. Again, I just want to set a little bit of the context. I guess you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Natalie. I'm going to use this visual as I just talk. Again, I'll keep this to about 2 minutes. As you folks know, I'll be back every week, or every meeting, so you can we can feel free to drill down on some of these issues. But again, I just felt it was important to talk a little bit about how this project fits into a bigger plan that the legislature and the OTC have kind of guided our direction on. And this all started with House Bill 2017. When the legislature passed that piece of legislation and Governor Brown signed it into law, it gave the Oregon Department of Transportation a set of tools. That set of tools, and under the guidance of the OTC, the Oregon Transportation Commission, it led to a shift in how we're addressing the transportation needs around the Portland metropolitan region. The OTC challenged us to think holistically, departing from this practice of the past, and we've talked a lot about the past today. This practice of build a project and it'll solve the problems of the region. Well, what we've learned is when you have that project-based approach when it deals with transportation, you just move the problem to another area. So we want to learn from our mistakes of the past and not make those of the future. So this approach to thinking about a system and how we address the issues around congestion and safety and mobility around the entire region has to be thought of as a system, not by project basis. Each of these projects are very important, and the ones you see on this map, again, I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail on because we get into the weeds on Rose Quarter quite a bit. But again, I wanted to talk about this approach and how this approach we've used in the past, as we've just talked about, impacts our air quality, but it also impacts our quality of life. So we're creating this reliable network. Yes, the pieces of this map are critical pieces to that puzzle. You know, these strategic investments that you see here are embedded in some of our critical needs around safety, seismic vulnerability, and then, of course, some of our more dramatic bottlenecks, none more dramatic than the one we experienced in the Rose Quarter project area. I know our committee colleague, Jana Jarvis, will tell you, I think we continue to run up the charts as far as this area. It is now the 18th worst freight bottleneck in the country. And Jana will correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that stat gets updated every year. And that's obviously creates all kinds of issues that the last group was just talking about, that this project is looking to correct. So with that, these projects are all really important, but they in themselves cannot solve the problem that we have in this region. They need to be coupled with the Oregon Toll Program. Now, this Oregon Toll Program has two distinct functions and features and outcomes that it's supposed to have. It's supposed to raise revenue for the projects that you see on this map, but it's also there to manage the demand of the system through a congestion pricing system. Now, we can talk more about that, and I'm not going to get too much into the devil of the details on that piece because it's pretty complicated. But it's that importance of managing the system to create that reliability that we need to have the system that we're aspiring to, and the OTC and the legislature have guided us to. So go to the next slide, please. I'll truncate my elevator speech. Now, this schedule and implementation strategy that we have here, I'll focus more on Rose Quarter. You'll see some of the other pieces here. Not much has changed here. We are obviously still in the planning stage and the design phase that we'll be going through for the next year and a half. But wanted to put this in perspective as it relates to the other pieces. You'll see tolling here, programmatic tolling. I'll draw your attention to the purple portion there. That's when we hope to have the toll program online. And with that, I'm just going to cut it real short and turn it over to my colleague, Lucinda Broussard, who is the toll program director. Good afternoon, Lucinda. All yours.
Thank you, Brendan. Good afternoon, ESC committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to just give you a brief update of what's going on the toll program. I'll be like Brendan. I could probably talk for 2 minutes, but I'm going to be, about 4. Next slide, please. So, I put this slide up here because it wasn't really to say, how are we going to do tolling? Because one of the things that people want to know is what is tolling? So basically, tolling is a user fee. And we use tolls as an umbrella for congestion pricing, point tolling, managed lanes, and we call it a toll, right? You're paying a fee to use the road. But we're going to do it all electronically, which means you're never stopping. We're capturing you as you go through. There's no stopping. There's no, we call them peach baskets because Florida was really kind of the first to collect tolls in that kind of manner. But there are no toll booths. So you're going highway speeds as you go through the corridors. Next one. I think this is a big one, and I've heard a lot about this today just listening in, and we're talking about equity and what works. I mean, you guys are talking about equity right now as far as work and jobs, but we're also talking about equity as far as who's paying a toll and what is that toll that they're paying. We have an Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. Here are some of the questions we've asked them. They are on now and they'll be working through as we go through tolls and building the toll program. We're putting equity in the forefront of it. So normally you get equitable solutions after because people complain about something. So it's anecdotal, but we're trying to be forefront. New. I can tell you that I've gotten a lot of questions from friends about, is this the right thing to do? It's not only the right thing, it's the right time. That we look at what the transportation system does to people, that we put projects in your backyard, and how does that affect you? Next slide, please. I-5, so as Brendan was talking about, we were talking about a holistic system. So it's the comprehensive system, which would go from north going all the way down to Boone Bridge, and then from I-5, where I-205 meets, to the end of the I-205 project, which is OR 213 to Stafford Road, and then on the other side of that. It sounds very complicated. I think Brendan's map would be a better, I'm trying to talk through it, but if you've seen the map, you kind of get, we're going to do 2 projects. We're going to do this I-5, and it's really not just an I-5, it's the rest of the I-205 to connect the complete system. So that way, when we're talking about managing congestion, we're managing congestion throughout a system, not just project by project. We're going to start what they call a pre-NEPA this spring, later on this spring. It feels like spring now, so let's say later on this spring, we're going to start our pre-NEPA. It's going to take about a year. It's a lot of engagement. So not just partner engagement, but community engagement. And then we're going to talk about what the project limits are, and then come up with some alternatives. What do those look like? So that is starting this spring, takes about a year, and then we'll go into the NEPA, not knowing if it's an environmental assessment or something else. We'll have to apply to FHWA for them to tell us that. But we are getting started with that work now. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have an I-205 project that's going on right now. We were out this summer for comment period, lasted about 75 days. We took into account the fires, so we wanted to make sure that we were observant of what's going on in people's lives. And that process is right at the start of NEPA. We're expecting that one to take about 2 more years, and then that one will be done. So we'll have 2 projects going at the same time. This one will start first, the I-205, and then the comprehensive system will come on after. And I think that is the end of my slideshow.
Dr. Holt, I told you we would move at the speed of light, but with that, the quickest presentation with the most content you'll ever have. But we still want to, obviously entertain questions, get back on schedule. Again, committee members, a lot to cover there. Happy to come back and dive deeper into this. It's a huge effort. And we want to make sure that that committee members are comfortable and understand how the Rose Quarter project fits into this bigger system. So with that, Dr. Holt, I'll leave it over to you to facilitate.
Thank you, Brendan and Lucinda.
And thank you, Lucinda.
Yes, thank you very much. Necessary information, again, robust conversations today, just a replete meeting full of conversation, content, and discussion. Any question for Brendan and Lucinda at this moment? President Peterson, I missed you at the end of the last section. I apologize for that. Always understand if I miss anyone, it's never intentional. So when brought to my attention, I always want to come back where there is space. I saw you unmute yourself. I don't know if you had a question or comment for this section or if you wanted to address the other. So President Peterson.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Brendan and Lucinda. This is exciting in terms of congestion pricing moving forward within Oregon. There's still a lot of questions to answer, and I look forward to working with y'all on all of that. Metro is part and parcel of trying to figure out with you both how do we deal with the demand management portion of it, the equity concerns, the income, low income concerns, as well as the diversionary impacts to the regional system. And having worked with Lucinda up in WashDOT, I know that we are in good hands and very much appreciate the work that will go on. My bigger question and observation goes back to the EIS-EA conversation that we're having. And I guess I want to take just a minute to put into perspective, I think where we are and where we need to think about going, and it gets to Nate's issue directly, because I think we're all feeling a little like there's strands of information being presented, all of it in relation to a couple different reasons that we are pursuing these strands of information. The independent reviews that we've seen, both on the GHG emissions as well as the lid, and the conversations that we want to have on racial equity and restorative justice, as well as a lot of the other values and goals that we brought up at the beginning. Normally, with a project of this size and scope and import within a metro region, there would be a full EIS, and not just because of the GHG emissions. It would be a process by which we all know how to proceed to put these issues on the table with a purpose and need statement that is more fully formed, a scope that is more fully formed, values, goals, and objectives that are then based on those things, and then the performance metrics and committee structure that would get us to be able to talk about each one of the issues that have been brought up today: design, GHG emissions, the restorative justice work. All of that would have been encapsulated in a process that we all know how to actually articulate. It's something that is a known quantity and is more predictive than I think what we're seeing now. So I guess what I would just ask is that we need to start putting this into a document that is the ESC's document. I have seen nothing reflect back what has been put on the table over time. And I think that is where a lot of us are starting to feel a little skittish about what has been actually heard versus what information has been shared. And so I don't have all the answers today. I just want to reflect back that the issue between an EA and an EIS, I think, is a bigger question. Not that I'm pushing it at this point, but I want to articulate why. It's not just about one issue or another. It is a process by which we were not included in the upfront work on an EA. And so now the process is trying to catch up with something that has no structure. And I feel like we need to have an ESC structure to our decision-making and start checking off these bigger policy questions and the trade-offs that result from them. And so I guess that's where I'll be looking for as we go forward. And I appreciate the moment to be on my soapbox, but I think it finally hit me upside the head as we were all talking. We're lacking that structure that we normally have, or at least those of us who are total transportation nerds who sit in this space way too much. That structure, that normal structure that we feel when we're working with TriMet on a light rail project, is not there.
Thank you, President Peterson. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, if there are no other comments, we are going to move to our next moment, and that is Portland Public Schools update. Julia, are you there?
I am.
Excellent.
Yes, and the update is that, and this hopefully will speed this along the agenda as well, is that we're preparing for the April meeting. And this is in response to questions of sort of where PPS is. And I think we, especially today's meeting, have more information about the project and its potential impact on Harriet Tubman. So we'll be ready at the April meeting.
Thank you very much. Nate, I know you had some specific things you wanted to articulate before you had to go. Julia, was there anything else you wanted to add to that before? Any comments? Nope. Okay,
that's
thank
it.
you. All right. Nate.
Oh, okay, thank you. And Julia, thanks for those quick updates. I hope it's been transferred to you that, I've been, as PPS is a partner with NAMAC, like many other agencies, we've taken notice of some of the concerns that PPS has been on record on this project with, and certainly all the young people who are coming and attending these meetings and being very vocal about their concerns related to Tubman. That in my mind, it certainly begs to draw more attention. And I think it's been over a year or two now, almost, that the PPS started talking about a potential Tubman relocation. And I guess where I'm at, and would love to hear where PPS is at, is really understanding what level of community engagement might be occurring, if there's concepts, plans. We know PPS has passed major bonds. Just trying to get a sense, where can somebody like me growing up in this community draw attention to when people see me and others and ask these types of questions. So without being under the hood of PPS, one thing that I would consider and would love to hear more about in April is there a community process for discussing a plan, a concept, an idea of maybe how we relocate these Tubman kids to a better place, whether this project happens or if there's some ill will towards it happening regardless, like what is that plan? Then the second one might be, what level of engagement is there a real estate broker? Is there anybody who's telling you what the valuation of this property is for Tubman? Again, trying to get a sense of if there's even a strategy in place, because my quick hustle around just knowing land banking and properties in this concentrated area is pretty important for the longevity of building a real center, a real place that people can call home again, maybe. And so just wondering if that's even on PPS's radar, because PPS has not talked about this other than, kids coming and speaking their futures around air admission. So in my mind, it just feels like the kids need to figure out how we can get them into a different location. So that's just Nate McCoy speaking, not Nate Mack speaking, but just Nate McCoy as a community person speaking and wanting to get some answers relative to that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And thanks for sharing more of your thoughts on what you're interested in hearing. And you referenced the bond. And yes, we did pass a bond in November of 2020. Those funds are designated and identified for specific projects already. And, certainly we're going to be making a very large investment in Jefferson High School, the Center for Black Student Excellence. But there aren't funds in there for a move of Harriet Tubman, nor do I think that I have heard at this point in time that that's viewed as a PPS obligation. And I guess I'll say the other thing is I will be prepared for the April meeting, but just to set expectations, the next 3 weeks we're all going to be solely focused on safely reopening our schools, which is a massive undertaking to be bringing, up to about 30,000 students back into school buildings across the city. So in the short term, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what all of our facilities people are going to be working on and thinking about, and that's reopening schools. So I think we'll be able to come back at a high level, but an April conversation in the midst of reopening is not going to be likely to be as detailed as maybe people might want.
Thank you, Julia. We appreciate that and understand the dynamic of what's happening. Part of what's been indicated here in this meeting, it's been indicated more than once. I just want to highlight it, that there are multiple areas of concern that the Executive Steering Committee has related to this project and the opportunities associated with it. And we want to make sure to drill down as much as is reasonable on each of those concerns and to answer them as thoroughly as possible and to think strategically about this work and how also it can be collaboratively connected to other agencies that have investment in this arena, keeping at the center of it the restorative justice lens. So any other questions for Julia? Excellent. Well, we will then move on to our next agenda item, and that is the independent cover assessment.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. We are going to try to speed through this. We are probably, we had a 55-minute time slot and we are down to 30, so we will try to get the content on the table, and hopefully if there are questions, people will be able to stay over and give us their feedback and their questions. So
Julia, I'm sorry, Gina, before you go any further, one of the things I tried to set at the onset of our meeting was that we anticipated it would go over, and I'm not asking anyone to cut their content for the sake of communication. We did indicate that if there are people who need to drop off, that they can, and we'll do what we need to make sure that they're made abreast of and get the full content of what's being communicated. So we're not asking you to shorten your the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Holt.
Yeah, you bet.
So good afternoon, Chair Simpson and ESC members. Today we have a couple of items that we wanted to cover with you. One of them is just sort of a report out on our work session 1 summary, our engagement activities. And the second is to begin to discuss some preliminary design ideas and opportunities with you that we would carry forward into our actual scenario development, which is in process. So if we could go to the next slide, I will start with the next slide, please, the work session. So as we've shared with you many times, each work session in our engagement process includes 2 community workshops. It includes a 2-week online open house. It includes an abbreviated workshop with HAB and an abbreviated workshop with you. And so all of these activities were completed between February 22nd and March 15th is when our online open house closed. The theme and the purpose of the first work session activities was to listen and understand how the highway covers can support the community's vision for neighborhood revitalization and provide restorative justice, which we heard about a lot about restorative justice for the Black historic Albina community. Next. So I just want to share who was in our community workshops. We outreached to over 100 community organizations, churches, neighborhood businesses, and at-large stakeholders. We ended up with 48 participants in our community workshops. 41 of those participants were Black historic community members, business owners, and/or residents. Next, This is a little more information. We had 8 local business owners, 6 of whom were Black historic community members, 30 Black historic community members who were recommended by different organizations, churches, or key individuals. We had 5 Black and 1 BIPOC community member recommended by affordable housing providers that participated in our workshops. And we had 3 at-large organizations that were in our workshops. And if you recall, our engagement groups, we had 5 targeted engagement groups, and these are the numbers. Even though 41 of those people fit in our group D, which was the historic individuals with ties to the historic albino community, they fit into other groups. They came out of the community group, they came out of the business group, or the resident group. Next. So this is where we have landed. We've summarized all the data from the community workshops, from the abbreviated workshops we've done with you, with HAB, and we also did an abbreviated workshop with the COAC. And we have landed on 10 themes heavily weighted towards community wealth. These are programming priorities that the community would like to see developed in and around the covers. This is the vision that they have for providing restorative justice to the community. So what we heard loud and clear, that the community really wants to control and be able to define what gets developed, and be able to maintain what gets developed on any land that goes on the covers, on and around the covers. So there is an interest in having some kind of a land trust that would hold developable land, and having a Black CDC or a specific entity that would work with other community partners to develop the kinds of assets that the community is interested in seeing in the area. There was interest in a Black enterprise zone that could provide incentives and benefits to Black businesses operating in the area. Of course, there was a lot of feedback about business spaces of all types and sizes for rental and ownership, with support services and access to capital for those businesses. There was interest in permanently affordable rental and ownership housing that is mixed use, multi-generational, built to a high standard of sustainability, with childcare nearby, and with different types of living spaces, such as live-work spaces for artists and makers. There was job training and education development center for vocational, technical, and clean energy jobs. And we heard a lot about this during some of the other discussions about the need for developing this pipeline to the kind of vocational jobs, construction jobs that are in the area, that are the opportunities that are coming forward in the area. There was a lot of interest in what was Black farming, Black sovereignty, having some kind of a Black food sovereignty center market that provides job training, fresh produce for local businesses and residents, and can supply large operators like hospitals, the convention center, and the hotel. There is a Black sovereignty food movement that involves Black and brown farmers that is very active and is growing in strength. So that idea came forward in the workshops. Next. So those were all outcomes that were identified in the community wealth. As you may recall, we organized how we processed the community based on the 3 restorative justice themes of community wealth, community health, and community cohesion. And these are the programming ideas that got the most mention in the workshops, in our abbreviated sessions with each of the advisory committees, and even just to a large degree off of the online open house, which primarily involved at-large community members from the Portland metro area. So in community health, people were very interested in a health and wellness center that would provide programming for all types of health, would provide recreation and health classes and access to healthy food. And we're very interested in a large and accessible gathering space for multi-generational celebrations, festivals, and active recreation. And finally, in the community cohesion area, probably the idea that got the most support was some kind of a Black cultural center that would showcase the history of Black Portland and would create experiences and education around Black art, Black food, Black music, would be an active center where things happened, education could go on, and people could have various experiences. And finally, there was a lot of interest in incorporating Black cultural aesthetics and art installations in the area, so that people have that experience, feel welcome, feel safe in the area. Once again, they feel like that this area is a place that belongs to them as well. So next, just quickly, I want to give you an overview of the online open house. We had 537 visitors to the online open house. 213 of those visitors filled out a survey. 86% of those visitors were white or preferred not to answer. About 70% were white, 4% were Black, and 7% were BIPOC. Over half of the visitors were under the age of 44, and only 17% of the visitors who filled out the survey live in the neighborhood. Another 19% of those visitors said they used to live in the neighborhood. So that's kind of a quick overview of our work session 1, and our next key deadlines are the work session 2, the online open house opens on April 16th. Our next community workshops are April 15th and 17th. The HAB workshop is on the 20th, and our workshop with you, our abbreviated workshop with you, will be on April 26th. So with that, I would like to move right in and hand this off. Could you go to the next slide? Hand this off to Charles, who is going to just set the stage for the ideas that we're considering for the design scenarios that we're developing for work session 2. Charles?
That's right. Yeah, thanks, Gina. We're at the midpoint between work session 1 and work session 2, and we thought we would share some tools that we've imagined that you can use to repair the street network, form efficient blocks to serve the restorative justice development goals here. We imagine the block should be as efficient as possible, and optimize the land for, in so doing, optimize land for community restoration. So with these tools, in going into work session 2, we want to organize candidate scenarios with these tools so that we can evaluate them in work session 2 with the community and with you all. And then following the feedback that we received then in work session 2, with your help, we're going to identify 2 to 3 scenarios that we're going to dig in more deeply and help to understand what kinds of recommendations the ESC feels they need to make to the OTC to change the current project in its form. And through our work, we're hoping you'll have a good basis to make those recommendations so that they're pragmatic and doable. So with that, with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Olivia.
Thanks, and we can go to the next slide. So before we dive into some of the preliminary design concepts that we're considering as we move toward work session 2, I wanted to talk for a moment about the role of governance in this work, which is really moving in parallel with the physical planning work that our team is engaging in. You know, as you heard Gina recount, the community expressed strongly the need for a governance structure that provides for ownership and involvement and reflects their priorities as the project is delivered, and then particularly pertains to the community's priorities for what happens after opportunities for development, job creation, and economic development are created through this project's implementation. So our process for thinking about a governance structure and recommendations is as follows. We start by asking what the community's priorities are, and we're starting to get a clear sense of those from workshop 1. Then we look at what the roles and responsibilities are required to deliver on those priorities. What kinds of entities do you need to do those things? Gina mentioned a couple earlier, a CDC, a community development corporation, a land trust, potentially some sort of enterprise zone and a set of incentives. And then we think about the types of entities that can fulfill those roles, and then whether those entities already exist or what we need to create new or bring together to make this a reality. While we're in early days of sorting out, what this recommendation and structure will be, there are a few things I wanted to highlight for you today. The first is that we think this structure will probably be similar regardless of which design option we choose. The community's priorities are strong enough and clear enough that we think that we'll likely come out with a similar structure or recommended structure, regardless of the variations on final design. The priorities that are reflected from the community also include things that will require multiple stakeholders and public sector partners to implement. Things like creating an incentive zone around Black enterprise, which would require the use of public dollars or public incentives to support Black-owned businesses. The creation of a land trust that would involve a public sector entity or agency deeding land or leasing land to a community-based governance organization or entity. And so we want to emphasize that it's important that as we have these conversations, we also think, and you all reflect on, the roles of your agencies as partners in delivering on these community priorities, and potentially the role of those who are not at the table, who we may be working to bring back, in this case, particularly the city and potentially others. Go ahead.
Thank you, Olivia. Hi, Kate White. I'm the technical lead with the independent cover assessment team. And you heard from Gina regarding the emerging community priorities, community wealth, community health, community cohesion goals. And thank you, Olivia, for an update on our approach around governance and community control. Our independent cover assessment team is just starting, as Olivia expressed, to identify organizations and community-based organizations that can help deliver the neighborhood restoration both on and around the cover. And you heard earlier today from ODOT on the latest mainline I-5 highway design ideas. Plans, and our independent cover assessment team's focus is really on the human experience in the neighborhood, working, walking, living, schooling on and near the highway covers. And we're going to share with you today some just initial ideas of some of the physical design options that could support the community priorities that are emerging.
Thanks, Kate. Kate Brooks, another Kate. Nice to see you all tonight. I'm going to just briefly reiterate, what Kate said is we want to continue to consider the adjacent neighborhoods around the API as we start to develop these cover concepts, and the neighborhood that's going to be using the development on the covers. So, we're looking at the existing services and community assets, the existing connections, and how we can enhance those elements of the existing neighborhood based on the priorities that we heard in our first workshop. Next. So we showed this diagram in our work session 1, which highlights the existing community assets and services in those adjacent neighborhoods. But since then, we've added more based on the feedback we received. So those are included here. And as we've noted, and what we heard is that, there's a lot of Black community members that no longer live here. But these community assets remain, and people still come to this neighborhood for them. Next. So our goal in these preliminary design ideas that we're going to share with you today is really a few things: to restore the street grid, which will restore or enhance the connections to and through the existing neighborhoods and across the highway, to restore the character and program of the historic neighborhood to the extent that we can, by providing development sites on and adjacent to the cover. And so this is, an overlay of the major connections we're looking at in each of the design ideas, which do connect to a number of the existing assets and services that we've heard are important. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our colleague or collaborator, Adrian, who's with Tool. He's going to discuss some specifics about the street network and highway ramps. Next.
Great, thank you, Kate. So the Highway Covers team has been reviewing the 20% design plan in the context of whether the street network can really support the community priorities that Gina described earlier. There are of course a lot of transportation needs to consider in this area, but really the main transportation challenge here is that the freeway bisects the local street network and really breaks up that street grid pattern. So that creates a number of challenges for supporting those community priorities. In particular, you can see here it sort of creates irregularly shaped land parcels that may be more challenging to program and to provide access to. It focuses traffic at a couple of key intersections, and that leads to really large intersection designs and streets that are designed to be large to support that level of traffic. It also results in a lot of complex intersections. So, for example, the Broadway-Vancouver intersection that has 5 legs becomes much less comfortable to navigate for pedestrians, for bicyclists, or even for drivers navigating the area. And then lastly, there's also just some unintuitive circulation, including the counterflow section, which is the section of Williams Avenue between Broadway and Vancouver, where traffic is actually on the opposite side of where you would expect it to be as it accesses that southbound on-ramp. And that just sort of violates the typical driver expectation and just makes it a little bit more challenging to navigate, especially for those that are unfamiliar with the area. Next slide, please. So I think just wanted to sort of plant the seed that the main constraints to creating that local street network that can support those community priorities are really focused around the ramp terminals. You'll see in the slides that Kate's going to go through here in a minute that the design team have really been exploring potential changes in how we would change those ramps to create a more connected and cohesive and smaller scale street network. In developing those ideas, we've really developed a set of objectives that we're trying to achieve that have guided those designs, and those are shown on the bullet points here. So it's really a focus on urban form and access, so that we can really create developable parcels that support the community vision. We want to create direct and efficient networks, and that's for all modes. We want to develop networks that are safe and comfortable and sort of minimize conflicts. And we want to reduce complexity and confusion and make navigation really logical. So I just say keep those themes in mind as Kate walks us through each of the different design ideas. Kate, back to you.
Thanks. So yeah, this, with that, we'd like to start to introduce our design ideas for how we can transform this area from a freeway space to a restored neighborhood place. And Adrian and I are going to walk through this together. Next slide. So our design explorations look at 4 big ideas with the community's priorities for a restored neighborhood driving these studies. I also want to reiterate these are preliminary studies. They're not recommendations or scenarios. We're looking at big moves and how effectively these moves can create development space or sites. We have not started to envision a program for these sites or started to evaluate the differences between them, but we will be getting into that as we work toward work session 2. So these big moves are reducing or removing the freeway impacts in the neighborhood, restoring the street grid, and creating larger and contiguous development parcels. In some of these ideas, we're considering minimal cover development, which might result in the community vision potentially needing to be supported off the cover. Next. So, yeah, thanks. This is our first design study, or what we're calling design idea 1. Just for orientation, we're showing highway ramps in red, major circulation relating to these studies, both existing and proposed, in black, and development parcels or sites also in black. So these are not building footprints. They are just urban blocks or parcels that would be available for development. And the cover areas are shown as a dashed white line within the black parcels. So following the review of the 20% design, this shows some slight modifications to it by shifting the southbound off-ramp slightly east, hugging the main line as much as it can. This is shown sort of diagrammatically at the number 1. So by moving this over slightly, it can provide a larger and contiguous development parcel to the west, or where number 3 is. Because the northbound on-ramp remains in its current location, we want to minimize the cover in that location because it really doesn't provide a sufficient size or area for meaningful program in that area. So we're showing, minimizing the cover development to support the street activity on Broadway and Weidler. We're also showing development on a cover along the Hancock connection, again, just to support the street for activation. This scheme would not change the vehicular circulation or connections as it's proposed in the 20% design. Adrian, do you want to add to that?
Probably just only to reiterate that under this design, we're still focusing all of that traffic onto a few intersections, and so the scale of street is going to be larger and the scale of intersection larger, and still as the complexities in some of those intersections are not solved as part of this design idea.
Great. Okay, next slide. So design idea 2 explores moving the southbound off-ramp over to align with and replace Flint, as shown with the red arrow near number 1. This study also changes the alignment of Hancock across the freeway, going straight across and connecting with North Hancock, as opposed to aligning with Dixon as the 20% design shows. This restores part of the street grid, though we lose the capacity and the connection of Flint for street traffic in this area. And the remainder of the development that's shown is very minimal, again, to support the street activity on Broadway and Weidler and on the new Hancock connection. This would likely be 1-story buildings that activate the street and essentially eliminate the view of the freeway. So it appears as a continuous street experience instead of a bridge. Because this is, pretty minimal development compared to some others on the covers, the community vision may require more area for development. And so it would need to be sort of supported in another place off of the covers. Next. Oh, sorry, Adrian, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
From a transportation perspective, by moving the southbound on-ramp onto the Flint alignment, we reduce the complexity of that 5-legged intersection at Broadway and Vancouver. So that's one benefit of this. And then secondly, we're dispersing traffic to more intersections along Broadway and Weidler. So that allows us to scale down some of that, some of the design of those intersections, and probably creates a few more opportunities to create, multimodal connections that are a little bit more comfortable and easy to use.
Great. Next. So this design study explores merging Vancouver and Flint across the highway, which simplifies the traffic connections at the existing southbound off-ramp because Vancouver no longer extends to Broadway. The northbound on-ramp has been moved north to Hancock, which opens up a large development parcel here shown at number 1. And I'll hand that over to Adrian to add.
Sure. So again, with this concept, with Vancouver sort of doglegging and taking up the Flint alignment to meet with Broadway, we're keeping the southbound off-ramp in its current location. So we've reduced that intersection complexity with dispersed traffic to multiple intersections. So it does do that. It does have the trade-off of cutting up that parcel in number 1 a little bit more than an option you'll see later. And by moving the northbound on-ramp to Hancock, we've created more separation for highway-bound traffic and local access traffic that's going north, to just get themselves in the correct lanes and position themselves and remove that conflict that currently happens as folks try to weave onto the highway just north of Broadway. So those are the main advantages of this design idea.
Great. Next. So, similar to the previous design idea, this study merges Vancouver and Flint as well across the highway. However, it explores moving all of the interchange ramps to the south of Weidler. So this provides a large and flexible development parcel shown at number 2, which can host a variety of different program types, including park and development. So Adrian, I'll let you speak to this one.
I think to reiterate your point there, Kate, is this option gives us maximum flexibility to reestablish the local street network purely for like local access and circulation. So it probably gives us the maximum bang for our buck in terms of meeting those community objectives. It allows us to reestablish the street grid and also to scale down the size of streets and intersections to make them more walkable, make them more community focused. And it also provides more opportunity to create more comfortable multimodal networks. So if you think of separated sidewalks, separated bike lanes, those sorts of facilities, much more amenable under this option.
Great. Next. So again, this study is also maximizing the amount of land on the cover area for development by removing the existing on and off ramps in this area and relocating them to the south. But instead of a large parcel like the previous design, this one focuses on restoring the street grid within the existing street network. So utilizing Flint, Vancouver, Williams, and extending Hancock across. And this allows for, consistent development sizes for, varied program development of buildings and parks potentially. And it also allows more access and continuity within the street network. Adrian?
This same advantages from a transportation perspective as the previous design, and then what Kate mentioned, it's really a trade-off between whether the community priorities require that sort of larger parcel where the numbers 2 and 3 are, or whether you go for more of a street grid approach, as Kate just described. So much the same transportation benefits as the previous design.
Great. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it back over to Gina, and we're going to open it up for feedback.
Thank you, everybody. So Dr. Holt, if you would help me identify anybody, what we would really like to hear is we'd like to have feedback from ESC members about some of these ideas, about how people are feeling about these ideas, so it can inform the work that we do in the next few weeks to develop our scenarios. And if you have questions, we'll take those questions, but I think what's important is there hasn't been a lot of technical work done on these ideas. We're actually, that work is starting now. So there's been a preliminary work done, but we won't be able to answer key technical questions you might have about any one of these options. They're really concepts now that we're trying to determine whether you see worthy for us to continue to explore, or if there's anything you say, no, we don't want that explored. We want to hear, that's the kind of feedback we really want to hear from you today.
Gina, we've got a hand, and it's Marlon.
Marlon?
Good afternoon, folks. I've noticed a lot of those options had folks exiting or entering from Williams and Vancouver. Is that correct? Just as someone who's taken those two streets often, just be really conscious that those streets heavy traffic. And you're going to add more by making those an exit for I-5. Along with that, they're also one-way and they're bike lanes. So there's a lot of traffic on there as it is right now. And there's also a ton of bikes on there every day during those rush hour times. So I would recommend you find another option than adding more traffic to Vancouver and Williams, especially since they're one-way streets.
Are you talking about, Marlon, just to clarify, those are where the ramps are now?
Yeah.
And so you're just saying that anything that we are exploring that would alleviate that problem, which I think Adrian was talking about, would be a preference. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your feedback. Dr. Holder, do we have anyone else?
Brendan. Yes, thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, sorry about that. At this point in the day, the AirPods battery goes out, so I had to switch my headphones. Sorry about that. Thank you. Great work. Wonderful. Just curious. Obviously, we have the existing approved environmental assessment. These are obviously very interesting. Which one of these would fit within that existing environmental assessment, and which ones would require going through a new process?
Nolan, do you want to answer that question?
Yes. So these are intended to be design ideas that we're sort of throwing out for exploration. They are not the scenarios that you'll see at work session 2. When we arrive at work session 2, our intent is that we will, as we've described in previous ESC meetings, have one scenario that is consistent with the constraints of the area of potential impact, one that may not be, and then an opportunity to create a third that would be of the ESC's direction. So these are intended to be moves that would be made. We haven't evaluated the impacts of those moves. We would do that as we start to shape them into these two concepts.
Thank you. We have another hand, and then I'll come to you, Chair Simpson. Bryson Davis. Oh, I'm sorry. Right before that, Brendan, did that answer? Is that sufficient?
Oh, it did. Yeah. Thank you, Nolan. Look forward to that, and just kudos to the IC team. Great work.
Thank you, Bryson.
Yeah, my question is just small, and I think this might be for Adrian. On design idea 4, is Hancock going all the way across? Is that how that's working?
Yeah, Hancock would cross the if I'm remembering the option correctly, it would cross the freeway and then connect to the west side of I-5. Kate, you might be able to talk a little better on the topography constraints there, but that connection is probably not going to go down to the street network on that west side, but would access potentially rooftops or other building connections on the west side of the freeway. And you could create that as either a street or a greenway that goes east-west across the freeway. Does that answer your question, Bryson?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Simpson.
Great. Thanks, ICE team. And Nolan, one quick follow-up question to Brennan's question that he asked. Since you said it still hasn't gone through any technicalities, can we make sure to put it in bold red text that these have not essentially been engineered nor gone through any technical analysis, just to be very clear when these are being kind of presented out into the public settings like this? Because some people might be misled to assume oh, well, if I could pick that option, clearly they said that this is an option, right? So let's just make it very clear that none of these have actually been vetted from a technical or engineering standard perspective.
Sure.
Yes.
We'll review the text that precedes these and see if we can make that more clear.
Clarify that. Yeah.
Okay. And just one point of clarification to also add on to Brendan's question. You said one of them, I believe you had indicated, fits within the existing environmental assessment scope.
So that's what we're responsible for doing at work session 2 is bringing you 2 scenarios, one of which is required to be consistent with the area of potential impact. That is what we intend to do. We wanted to use this meeting, which is in between work session 1 and work session 2, to throw out some what if ideas, to throw out some things that we're studying as we create those 2 scenarios to get your feedback about those. So rather than evaluate their impacts and be able to tell you that they do or don't conform, the goal was to get your feedback. We'll then do that analysis and make sure that we bring you one that does not extend beyond the impacts in the API. Got it. And I know President Peterson mentioned it earlier, and she's adamant because she's this is what she does. This is her trade. This is her expertise. Just going back to this question as it pertains to EA and EIS impacts and that entire conversation. I think it's something, as we're talking about these potential scenarios now, for us to really, as a group, as a collective here, to really think really hard and concrete about time. I think Grace had mentioned earlier, just the fact she had mentioned a number like $60 million of added time that could be, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody please, but I remember I thought I heard her say $60 million as it pertains to extending. 60 to 80. Sorry, what was that, Gina?
She said 60 to 80. She used that number. She threw out that magnitude of number. Yeah.
And she made a really good point, and I wish she was still on, because she made a good point suggesting that by adding more time, what that cost could be and how that cost and those resources could be used for all these community outputs as it pertains to this project. For a lot of the concerns people are raising, I'm not sure how specifically they could be used, but I'm sure we could find as a group and with other stakeholders some really good alternative and innovative uses for those resources. But if the group, sees that it's of value to add and extend and delay, I personally don't, because right now we're in a recession, and I would like to make sure that we're creating jobs and creating economic opportunities for the people in those communities as fast as possible. Then I think that's something that we probably should really have a real open dialogue about. And so, sorry to but it's just like all a bunch of things kind of tie back into timing and output and design options and what is our boundaries that we want to as a group stay within, and how much more do we want to bend outside of those lines.
I think those are all considerations that will have to be made once we get everything before you. Those will be the kind of deliberations that you will have the prerogative to make.
And then, okay, perfect, I appreciate it. And then one last follow-up for the survey piece. I would assume everybody knows that those are not the most attractive numbers as it pertains to demographics for this particular emphasis of this project. And I would highly encourage folks to go back, figure out how to be more forward-facing and aggressive in terms of outreach into your stakeholders. Because if you're telling me that only 20 to 30 of the people in an area, which is what we're talking about, historical African-American community, were African-American that responded to a survey of 530 respondents, that something's not adding up. And when 90% of your respondents, or about 40 to 50% of your respondents are people that actually live in the area and that used to live in the area, that still doesn't make a lot of sense either. So if those data points are going to get presented, let's have some like substance to it. Because to me, that doesn't sound like we're hitting the bar doing our outreach adequately to the right stakeholders as it pertains to the concerns on this project.
Right. Chair Simpson, I think part of the issue is that we really need our stakeholders that are involved in this project to be working their organizations to actually take those surveys. And so we're going to try to do them. I mean, we were challenged for time to get that online survey up and running, but we're planning a much more robust, with ODOT's help, outreach to all of these organizations. And what we would really implore all of you who are on, we're sitting in positions on these advisory committees, is to us, to have your networks engage, because we did have a lot of organizations that were troubled about whether they should engage or not, and whether it was a betrayal of ABT. I mean, we had a lot of that noise going on as a result of this. And I think what we've done is build some trust in the community that this isn't through this first exercise, and the kind of folks that were at the table and people seeing that. So I do think that we will do a better job in this next survey, and we would, ask for your help in doing that. By once that stuff is on the street, that you help push it through your own media.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Steve Witter quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. Nolan hates it when I start down this line of questions, but as you do start to move into those kind of investigations of the technical aspects of the proposals, I would sure like to see some section drawings to understand vertically how these things are working. And then I start to get to structure depth. And as we're talking, I mean, I think everybody knows that the structure depth is going to really be impacted on whether there are structures on the lids or not. And so I just think it's time to start scratching at that one a little bit, because expectations are hypercritical here. And I don't think anybody wants to create an expectation of something and then we find we have a roadblock that we, no pun intended, that we can't get past. And, cost has always been a big concern of everybody's when we talk about this particular project element. And so I think all of those inputs are going to be part of the decision-making that the community and this group will be faced with. So thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Noah.
Just confirming that that's certainly our intent. Love when you go down that road, Mr. Witters.
Any other comment from the Executive Steering Committee? Questions for the ICA team? Thanks everybody for being willing to go a little past time. Chair Simpson, was there a closing thought before we?
No, I think I've eaten up too much clock today with my comments, Dr. Holt. I appreciate you referring back to me, but if anybody else has any comments, I would definitely leave it open for them as we close out today.
Bryson, I see your hand.
Yeah, so one thing that I kind of see that the ICA team does pretty well is they come to the various sections that they're looking at with ideas about how to integrate a lot of the community stuff, a lot of the community concerns into what they're doing. And they seem to take a more holistic view of the project rather than it just being what's on the covers. Also consider how the traffic flows in the neighborhood around it and then on and off the highway. Whereas with some of the other components, if I feel like they're completely detached from everything else going around it. Like all I'm doing is sitting in this car on I-5 trying to get to Seattle, and not taking into account as much of the community concerns, the neighborhood connectivity, and all the other components that are part of this project. I think it would be very helpful going forward if those other components took the same 50,000 foot view approach of how this project integrates with all of the considerations, and not just looking at it from the highway flow standpoint, but talking about how each change to each design impacts each component of what we're doing and the goals we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Thanks for the comment, Bryson. Thanks for the work, everybody. I appreciate you going over tonight. As you could tell, it is necessary. I will end where I began, and that is this project is about doing things differently. It's about doing work differently. It's about thoughtfully, intentionally for people who've been impacted. Ultimately, while we're talking about asphalt and concrete and vehicles and electric and or air, we're talking about people. And we're talking about how it impacts people and the opportunities that are created for people and the possibilities that are created for people generationally. And as we do that, that means that we expand our thinking and our capacity. I appreciate your investment. I appreciate your effort and your energy. I promise you that the concerns of the Executive Steering Committee are not falling on deaf ears. We are working diligently to address all of the issues that have been articulated, brought up, addressed, identified, and bring them into a space where we can have this kind of conversation. In light of that, you remember when we first started, I indicated we may need to meet more frequently because of the amount of information that we need to cover, or we may need to meet more extensively because of the amount of information that needs to be covered. Something to revisit, talk through, and talk about. Don't want it to appear by any stretch of the imagination that this is, that the work associated with this is trying to slide anything by. It is to try to create the space where we can effectively and efficiently have the conversations that we need to have, to make the decisions that we need to make, so that the people who are impacted have the best opportunity to succeed. A win for this project is that the community is better. That's the win for this project. And most specifically, the most impacted community members, those who were historically harmed by the fact that I-5 is here. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your effort. Thanks for your expertise. We will be gathered again on the 4th Monday of April. And until then, please be safe. Take care of yourselves and your family. Have a good night, everybody.
For your time. We appreciate it.